Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to The Truth. I'm your host, the one you love the most, Niall Hesson, back with a brand new episode here on The Truth. Back once again with my boy AJ Ponciano. AJ, how are you doing here today?
I'm doing great. How about yourself now?
I'm doing great as well. We got another big week 14 here in the NFL, kicking things away with our Thursday night show. Just the three shows this week. Obviously, last week was a little bit different just because of the Black Friday game and things like that. But overall, we got three shows for you this week. You obviously saw our week 13 takeaways covering a big Thanksgiving weekend. We now transition over to week 14, and I feel like I'm going to repeat myself the last 3 weeks and the next 3 weeks moving forward. But the biggest thing that I'm going to mention is the fact that it is officially do or die time for your fantasy teams. Because for most leagues, I mean, I know obviously every league's different, but for most leagues, this is your final week of the regular season. This is your last chance to get into the playoffs and make that postseason push. For those leagues that are not, this is still a huge week for you. Obviously, every week as you get closer to the playoffs helps with seeding, scoring, things like that. Things are more solidified. So we hope that we can help as much as possible, kicking things off with this Thursday night matchup. And we got a really nice and intriguing Thursday night matchup for you guys. I feel like a lot of Thursday night matchups, it's gotten better, but in the past, some of these Thursday night matchups have just been like, what are we watching? Thank God they got rid of that rule that everyone needed one primetime game, because we would see teams like the Texans, and I don't even know. It was bad back before the Texans were good. So we're on a different page. We got a huge NFC North showdown. We got the Packers traveling to take on the Detroit Lions. Packers, I believe, are 9-3, and I believe the Lions are 11-1. If I can do quick math, I'm totally just ballparking that, but really in that realm of possibilities. And overall, be a big matchup. So we got a lot of players. Obviously, there's some obvious starts, sits, all that stuff, but we'll try to kind of either mention those guys or guys that maybe not too many people have your eyes on. So without further ado, go ahead and give me any starts you have for this matchup.
Yeah, so the first one, I'm going to go with Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed these last couple weeks hasn't been great, last 3 weeks. It's been a while since we've seen him had a good game. Ironically, his last good game was against Detroit, and I expect him to kind of have similar production again. He's also been really good against Detroit his entire career. His rookie year, first time they ever faced off, 3 catches, 55 yards, a touchdown there. 4 yards, 34 yards, a touchdown. So he was finding the end zone even though he was out on receptions or a lot of yards there. But last time they played, 5 receptions, 113 yards. Detroit's been bottom of the league in giving up yards. I believe they give the ninth most passing yards up to this point. One big thing is not a lot of passing touchdowns, only 10 touchdowns to 14 receptions. But again, almost just over 2,900 passing yards, which is number 9. So not good in that aspect. But Jane Reed, one of those guys, after the right after the catch, that's been one of the big things throughout his career. Is you really just want to give him space. And Jane Reed, he's had the same type of trend where he has a bad 3, maybe 4 weeks, and then he kicks off and has a really good week. Well, he's had 3 really bad weeks. He's facing Detroit again, who last time they played each other had over 100 yards there. I expect a pretty solid game. He's someone who I have in my flex position in my Coastal League, and one of the things that he's been so back and forth. Like he had a good week last week. He was fantasy relevant because he had 2 touchdowns. But outside that, had 24 yards on 3 receptions. The 2 touchdowns really saved him. Really saved me also because that game came down to like 3 points or something like that just last week. But one of the things is that he's been good against Detroit. He's either found the end zone at least once, or he's had over 100 yards. It's been one of the two, and I expect him to probably have close to like maybe 60 yards. And I do think he does find the end zone. It could be on a jet sweep, but this is also a game I think that the Packers are going to have to be throwing a lot. Next up, I have Tucker Kraft. Tucker Kraft, another one of those guys who's been back and forth all year. We've seen big games out of him. We've seen games 4 catches, 88 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 catches, 78 yards, a touchdown. Last 2 weeks hasn't been the best. Last week he was good, but the 2 weeks before that wasn't. Against Chicago, only had 1 target, no receptions. Against San Francisco, 2 catches, 26 yards, 1 touchdown. This game against Miami, which was the snow game, 6 catches, 78 yards, no touchdowns. He's been a big part of this offense when he's been healthy. I think he's just been injured. And like I said, a lot of yards given up. The Lions have given up through the air. And again, not a lot of touchdowns. This could be a Tucker Kraft game where we see 5-6 receptions for 60, 70 yards. I mean, it's very doable for Kraft. And it's going to be hard for them to get the receiving touchdowns. But these are guys that I do trust, especially in a game script where I think they'll be down. I think they'll have to try to come back in the third or fourth quarter. And we know Jordan Love. Jordan Love, they're going to let him throw a lot, especially a game. I believe this game is in Detroit. So it's inside a dome. They aren't going to have to deal with the weather of being in December in Detroit. Or, sorry, in Green Bay.
So I'm going to go with two starts here. They're both going to be quarterbacks. Any guesses? Yes, Jared Goff and Jordan Love. And I think this is a discussion that a lot of people maybe weren't expecting, like early on in the season, to be two guys that maybe we should consider starting or maybe we should consider sitting. Obviously, this year's a little bit different. I know injuries have plagued Jordan Love a little bit, but Jared Goff is his 11th position ranked quarterback, and Jordan Love is his 17th, both averaging right around 17 fantasy points a week, which is good. But obviously, both quarterbacks, as every quarterback, have their ups and downs. I mean, Jordan Love consistently the last 3 weeks has been pretty efficient. Hasn't thrown an interception in his last two games. Has two touchdowns in both those two games to equate to four. He just doesn't provide really any rushing value, which is a little bit of a concern to me. And then obviously Jared Goff had a really good week in week 11, not the best week in week 12 for fantasy purposes, and a pretty solid week at 17 points last week, just kind of average. So you got tops and bottoms overall, but I think this is going to be a high scoring offensive game. Every time I say that, it ends up being the opposite. It's a low scoring game, but I really do feel like this NFC North battle is going to be a high scoring affair. Both offenses are extremely high powered. Obviously, the Lions probably the best offense in football, just from top to bottom, as mentioned a couple weeks ago. You could build a Lions theme team of just all Lions players and probably win your league, just because quarterback, two running backs, at least two wide receivers, a tight end, and a flex, and the kicker and defense. I mean, you can't get much better than that. Packers also have a lot of talent. The biggest thing is I feel like it's kind of, especially the wide receiver position, like wide receiver by committee. As you mentioned with Jaden Reed, a lot of inconsistencies. Watson inconsistencies. Wicks inconsistencies. Like there's so many talented young receivers. You just never know, pick and choose every game. But regardless, I think these two guys are must starts. I wouldn't be surprised if this is a 30-30 type game. It's a really high scoring affair, but I think this should be a fun game regardless. And I think the quarterbacks are going to have a big part of why these offenses are able to move efficiently and produce a lot of fantasy output for your fantasy teams, especially at this pivotal stage of the fantasy season. All right, what about any sits?
I only have one. It's going to be Sam Laporta. Sam Laporta, you could see the upside the last 3 weeks. He is averaging 6 targets, and he's had 3 receptions each one of those. But it really hasn't been that good. It's been the touchdowns that's really saved in the last 3 weeks. 3 weeks ago against Houston, 3 for 66 and a touchdown. Indy, 3 for 19, no scores there. And Chicago, 3 for 6 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, just hasn't been good this year. I mean, a complete 180 from what we saw from Sam Laporta his rookie year. I think he was dealing with an injury early on, but even now, it's been 5, 6 weeks since the last time I heard any update on that injury that he was dealing with. And he just really hasn't been productive. Like I said, it's in the touchdowns. He scored 3 touchdowns in the last 3 weeks. That's 3 of the 5 total touchdowns that he scored all year. And one thing about the Packers, yes, they are middle of the road on yards given up, but only 16 passing touchdowns given up to 11 interceptions, a really good ratio there. But their two linebackers that they have a little bit more in coverage have been really good this year. Edgerrin Cooper and Quay Walker, two of the best coverage linebackers. It's usually been Edgerrin Cooper. If I remember correctly, he's been more of the coverage linebacker on tight ends. He's been really good. The safeties there, Xavier McKinney, I believe it either leads the NFL or is top 3 in the NFL right now in interceptions. He comes down and guards the tight end at times as well. It's one of those things that Laporta he's had the consistency in targets and 3 receptions, but it's only really been the touchdowns. If you take away the touchdowns, he's a bottom tight end right now. I mean, you take away these last 3 weeks, you take away close to 20 to 30% of his fantasy productions because you take away 18 points there with those touchdowns. You take away 9 receptions and like 75 yards, which I know not impressive numbers if that's taking away 20 to 30% of your production of the entire season.
Yeah, I mean, I have Sam Laporta as well, so I'll just kind of echo some of the points you made quickly. I mean, let me be clear: if you have Sam Laporta, it's your really only option, just because you invested a lot of draft capital in him. I probably would still start him. I know I have in one of my leagues. I'm going to start him, but be optimistic as well as skeptical at the same time because you never know what you're going to get out of Sam Laporta. I mean, yeah, he had 2 touchdowns last week, great, but he had 3 catches for 6 yards, right? Like it's just hit or miss, and that's the tight end position as a whole. Obviously, he's had a disappointing year as far as tight ends are concerned for fantasy wise, but a great run blocking tight end for the Lions. 15th ranked position tight end, 9.1 fantasy points a game, way under expectations. And this just sucks. It really does. But I don't think there's any reason to necessarily give up hope on Laporta. I think he's definitely going to be one of those guys as the season kind of comes to an end that really steps up and has production. And you see that a lot of times. It's like these top tier guys like make up their production at the end of the season, which is why you always have to be so patient. But I do think if you have another better option, I would avoid it. But at the end of the day, Laporta is a really good option. The biggest thing is, can he get some consistency? And I really think a large part of that isn't his fault. I think it's been the fact that the Lions offense has been so good and so dominant. They just haven't needed Laporta. They haven't thrown the ball as much as Jared Goff. They haven't at times, guys like Amon-Ra and even Jamison Williams have had quiet weeks because they're scoring 52 points because their defense is scoring or their running backs are scoring. Like they haven't needed to pass the football. But now they're in a position where they're probably going to be in a dogfight with the Packers, could potentially be trailing. Like you're going to see more production the deeper the situation gets. And I think the Lions are going to get a little bit tighter as far as just getting towards the end of the season. I think Laporta could be a good option for your fantasy teams moving forward. I would still probably start him if you have him on your team, but I think if all these guys, especially the borderline guys, Laporta is a one guy that you might want to avoid, especially for this matchup. What about any sleepers?
Jameson Williams, I can't remember if it was an injury or a bye week, would have been 5 weeks ago in between the Minnesota and Houston game. But ever since that Houston game, his target share has gone up from 5, 6, 7, and 7. Reception, same thing, 3, 4, 5, and 5. His worst game was last week with 5 receptions, 28 yards, 2 rush attempts for 18 yards. So not good there. I mean, if you're a PPR league, it wouldn't have been a bad flex play, or maybe a very low end wide receiver too. But we've seen it before. 4 receptions, 124 yards, a touchdown against Jacksonville. Against Houston, 3 receptions, 53 yards, 5 receptions, 64 yards against Indy. He's had some rush attempts there, 24 total rushing yards in the last 3 games on 4 attempts. They've just been finding ways to feed him the ball, especially early on. I want to say just last week in Chicago, I remember seeing like he had like 3 receptions for like 8 yards or something like that. I mean, they were trying to get him the ball there. Like I said before, the Packers defense is middle of the road right now, but they're going to have the wide receiver 2 on them. They're going to try to stretch the field of Jameson Williams a lot in this game, especially being inside. They're not going to have to deal with the weather. They're going to be able to pass without any type of weather hindering the passing game. And that's kind of how it's been the last 2 weeks. Chicago and Indy Indy was a little bit better, but Chicago out there in the weather, out there in the cold, they weren't really able to get on the ball out in space. But if I at Jacksonville, it was at home inside a dome. It was really solid. Just one of those things that I think Jameson could have a great game. And I wouldn't sleep on the Lions defense this week. They've been really good the last couple of weeks. Sacks, yes, they have only 30, but the interceptions have been there. They haven't been allowing a lot of points. The only question mark is their run defense for the most part. Josh Jacobs, he's been good, but he's one of those guys that it comes in big plays. I mean, last week had good fantasy value, or 2 weeks ago where he had like that 44-yard reception. But outside of like that, like it was just small plays. They were giving him here and there. This weekend I wouldn't be surprised if Jordan Love throws 2 interceptions. And we've seen him throw a lot. He also throws a lot of interception because of how much they ask him to throw the ball. And I wouldn't be surprised in the game that they have 2-3 sacks, because this is also a game that, yes, the Lions, they basically had the division locked up. It's not 100% sure because the Minnesota's been good, but this is a big game for them. They need to win this game. The defense really needs to step up, because with this win, they don't secure the division, but it puts them in a really good opportunity to win it.
I think regardless, either team, whoever gets a win, puts themselves not only in the division, but I think can get close to clinching a playoff spot just because of the wild card seed and the way it is. I have 3 sleepers. First, as you mentioned, Jamison Williams. I mean, obviously, I traded for him in our dynasty league from you. I've liked what I've seen out of Jamison. I mean, obviously, I feel like there's always going to be a high risk, high reward, but I feel like that's a lot of receivers in football. Had that big game, I believe it was in week 11, where he had 22.6, 4 catches, 124, and a score. Slowly kind of declined a little bit, but that's just because you're not going to consistently get 24 points a week. The person who did that last year off the top of my head was Justin Jefferson, and he's had a little bit of a down year as well. So it's not possible really, unless you're a number 1 fantasy wide receiver, to be as dominant as he was in that week, but he's also not even the number one option on that team. Maybe not even number two if you had a perfect system. But anyways, Jameson's still a really good target. I think a lot of people are kind of sleeping on him just because they don't know what they're going to expect out of a guy like him. But now he's rostered in 80% of leagues. He obviously seems to be more of a deep ball threat, which is obviously huge for fantasy owners who are looking to have that big kind of threat. And I think Jameson Williams has the potential to have a big game here on Thursday night. And I think a lot of people kind of are hoping for the same, especially in those flex position, those deeper leagues where people kind of are dealing with a situation where they don't know where to go or where to turn to or things like that. Secondly, I'm going to go with Christian Watson. Now, similarly to Christian Watson, Jameson Williams, excuse me, Christian Watson also kind of seems like a big ball threat. He's going to be a high risk, high reward player. I remember last year, I believe it was on Thanksgiving, he had a really big game. So he's had success against the Lions in the past. He likes those interdivisional matchups. Honestly, does great in his career against the division as a whole. Last time he played Detroit, 3 catches, 37 yards, a little bit of a quiet performance, but last year was the big year we had a big game. And then most recently against a divisional opponent at Chicago on the road, 4 catches, 150 yards, and 19 points. So there is a high risk, high reward component. But, Christian Watson, for the most part, does better in those divisional matchups, particularly on the road. And last year, I believe it was last year, at Ford Field on Thanksgiving. So there's a lot of things trending in that right direction. Again, it's kind of like you're playing Russian roulette with a guy like Christian Watson, but I think this is an opportunity to kind of bite on that and see if you can lead to some success. And then finally, this is just kind of a fun one. It's Emmanuel Wilson. It's the backup running back for the Packers. Now, obviously, I know Josh Jacobs is the lead horse there, and he's had a tremendous, season thus far. But overall, I mean, besides last week, Emmanuel Wilson has had a pretty solid performance, just getting around anywhere from 7 to 11 touches a game, which is good for a backup running back. And he's only gotten over 10 points once, which was in 16.5 in week 3 against Tennessee. But he's a guy that could be a reliable option, especially if Josh Jacobs were to go down with an injury. Now, obviously, I don't wish that upon anybody, but I know Josh Jacobs was kind of lingering with an injury. I believe 2 weeks ago. He seemed to be fine because he scored 3 touchdowns, but you never know, right? I mean, obviously, last night at the time of recording this, we saw 2 running backs go down in McCaffrey and Jordan Mason, and it's a next man up mentality. I know you can't predict injuries as well, but overall, I mean, without injuries, particularly in 14 and 16 team leagues, he could be a flex option if you're kind of in need of a running back that doesn't really know where he's at. As far as that, also on top of that, Emmanuel Wilson's a guy that's only rostered in 2% of leagues. So if you're in a deep running back league or you need some positioning, Emmanuel Wilson. Now, is he going to be a home run guy? No, but he has the potential to do so. I wouldn't be surprised if he kind of makes some noise, especially coming up here towards the end of the fantasy season. What about Bus?
I only have one, and it's going to be Josh Jacobs. One thing about Josh Jacobs I've noticed this year is that he really needs the amount of rush attempts to have big games. Whenever he's had sub 20 rush attempts, he's only had about 3-4 good games. Back against Philly in week 1, 16 rush attempts, 84 yards, 19 rush attempts, 73 yards, and a touchdown, and 13 rush attempts for 95 yards, 2 receptions for 13 yards. Outside of that, if you look at a lot of and then 18 rush attempts, 76 yards, a touchdown. That game, he also had 4 receptions for 58 yards. So it's one of those things that the receptions really saved him there overall. But if you look at a lot of these other games, like I said, when he doesn't get the rush attempts, it really hasn't been that good for him. Against Detroit on the ground last time, that was the 13 rush attempt game for 95 yards, 2 receptions for 13 yards. But the run defense for the Lions has been their strong suit. They've given the 5th least amount of rushing yards with just over 1,100 with only 9 rushing touchdowns. Like you mentioned with Wilson, he's someone that I wouldn't mind either. I was thinking about putting him as a sleeper because this could be a game that we see Josh Jacobs only get 13, 15 rush attempts because they're going to need to throw a little bit more, and he only gets you 50, 60 yards with a couple receptions. This is a game I think they hold him sub 90 yards, even sub 80 total yards through the air and on the ground, and I don't think he gets in the end zone. Maybe 15 to 18 total touches between receptions and rush attempts is a number that I wouldn't be surprised if he stays at. If he stays under 20 total touches, we've seen it throughout this year. He's only had those 3-4 good games where either touchdowns or receptions with receiving yards has really saved those games for him.
For me, I'm going to go ahead and go with Tim Patrick. And I know Tim Patrick's a guy that's not really relevant because he's rostered in 0.6% of leagues. But more recently, he's had a couple of games where he's actually had some repetitions. I mean, 3 for 26, 4 for 55, 2 for 48, 5 to 9 fantasy points isn't eye popping. But I think a lot of people are kind of starting to buy the hype on some deep ball threats and a guy like Tim Patrick. And Tim Patrick is a talent of itself, don't get me wrong. The issue is it's just a crowded room, right? You got a Monron, Jameson Williams, Sam Laporta, and half those guys every game don't even get targeted. So I just kind of wanted to throw it out there. I know some people have been asking me about a guy like Tim Patrick, particularly in a deep league. I think it could be a safe option in a deep league, but I don't think it's really worth it. I don't think it's going to make as much of an impact as some of these other guys. And, especially as we move closer to the end of the season, kind of what successes a guy like Tim Patrick could really have, and especially such a pivotal week like week 14 and this last regular season week really is. Do you have a game prediction?
Yeah, I think this one will be a little bit closer. The last time that they played, the final score was 24-14 for Detroit. I think Detroit does win this game again, even though I know it's really hard to win two games against a divisional opponent in the same season. I think it will be 27-20. I think the Packers score a little bit more, and the Lions only get another field goal out of it. One of the things is that playing indoors is going to be a little bit different. Last time they played, it was at home for uh, was at home for the Packers. They're going to Detroit, so Detroit's able to kind of open up the playbook a little bit more. If I remember correctly, this was a pretty good Jared Goff game, but this was an amazing David Montgomery game. If I remember, I think he had 3 touchdowns in this game, and he had like 120 total yards. I think they're going to try to focus in on that and make Jared Goff make some more plays than what he had to last time.
I'm going to go with the Packers 35-31 on the road. I really hate this. I think this speaks to show how much I really think the Packers are going to win this game. And it's not because I don't trust the Lions. First of all, it's hard to win 11 games in a row. That's what they're going for here. But secondly, as you mentioned, it's hard to beat a division opponent twice, even at home. On top of that, the Packers are a good football team and they're hungry, right? I mean, as much as I would love to see, Detroit lose, it's a lose-lose situation for me. Because if Detroit wins, then the Vikings are probably 2 games back. If the Packers win, then we're basically tied for second, right? Like it's a lose-lose situation. But I think the Packers kind of put a little bit of a damper here in this Lions offense. And this Lions win streak as a whole, the 10-game win streak that they're on, obviously had a tremendous season thus far. And I think that will continue. But I think they kind of get held a little bit here, especially towards the end of the game. I think the Packers offense explodes. I think Love is a good game, even Jared Goff in that matter. But I really think moving forward, the Lions, are going to put up a good fight, but I think the Packers have a good chance of kind of coming away with a victory and surprising a lot of folks out there. I really do. Thank you guys for listening to another episode here on The Truth. If you guys did enjoy it, make sure you follow The Truth on Twitter at The Truth as one to stay up to date with the latest information regarding The Truth, including podcast dates, podcast uploads, and other important information you don't want to miss. Make sure you guys also follow The Truth on Instagram and TikTok at the.tt.truth. Are you looking to find a drink that offers peak hydration, raises your energy levels, speeds up your recovery, and keeps your mind sharp through focus and memory? Look no further than Acid Rainwater. I'm excited to partner with Bloodline Sports AZ and Acid Rainwater, which focuses on peak hydration and productivity while also maintaining ecosystem-friendly product. Use code HESSON15, that's HESSON15 for 15% off every purchase. As always, I'm your host, the one you love the most, Niall Hesson, joined once again by AJ Ponciano. Take care and good night.